There's a quiet kind of pain that deep thinkers carry. It doesn't scream, it doesn't ask for attention, just lingers silently like an invisible weight pressing on the soul. It's the pain of noticing too much, of hearing what wasn't said, of feeling what others refuse to feel. You might be at a dinner table. Conversation drifts lightly, full of laughter, small talk, and harmless gossip. When remarks about the weather, another dives into the latest neighborhood drama. Heads nod, polite chuckles pass around, and everyone seems perfectly comfortable inside that surface-level rhythm. But then you speak into the atmosphere shifts. You say something real, something honest, something that breaks the pattern. It lands with the softest thud. No laughter follows. No replies echo back. Instead, you notice the subtle discomfort, a shifting of posture, an awkward throat clear, a swift redirect anyway. And just like that, the moment is gone. You felt it, didn't you? It's that subtle sting of being dismissed. It's that silent rejection that keeps repeating itself more times than you'd care to count. Carl Jung understood this experience all too well. He believed that the deeper one delves into the corridors of their own mind, the further they drift from the world outside, but not because something is wrong with them. No, it's because the world is built around illusion. It favors those who blend in, who follow unspoken scripts, who smile and nod without question. It embraces those who pretend to be okay, even when they're quietly falling apart inside. But deep thinkers, they don't know how to pretend. They see too clearly. They feel too deeply. They see beyond polite laughter, past hollow customs, through the fragile masks people wear just to get through the day. Jung once said, "The more intelligent and self-aware a person is, the more they suffer from the general unconsciousness of society." That wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. And it begins early. In childhood, most deep thinkers are misunderstood. They ask questions. No one wants to answer why. Do grown-ups lie? Why do rules feel so random? Why does love seem to disappear when you need it most? And rather than receiving thoughtful responses, they're met with deflection. Stop asking so much. Just listen. Can't you be more like the other kids? So they quiet themselves outwardly. But inside, their questions grow sharper, heavier by the time they reach adulthood. They've crafted entire inner worlds, lands of unspoken truths, arid feelings, and observations too complex to share. But the outside world doesn't welcome that complexity. In the workplace, they're urged to stick to the script. In relationships, they're told they're too intense, too sensitive. On social media, they're advised to keep things light and positive, so they hide not out of fear, but out of experience. Because they've learned, often painfully. What happens when they don't? Carl Jung believed that society fears what it doesn't understand, ... and deep thinkers, they are deeply misunderstood. When you express a complex idea, people assume you're showing off. When you sit in silence, they suspect you're being arrogant or judging them. When you open up about pain or trauma, they think you're being overly dramatic. When you ask deep, probing questions, you're told you're overthinking. But the truth is, you're not overthinking. You're seeing with clarity. You're picking up on things others overlook. You're tuning in to the emotions others have buried. And that makes people uneasy. Not because you're wrong, but precisely because you're right. You speak truths that others spend their whole lives avoiding. You shine a light into the corners they've worked so hard to keep in the dark. You disrupt the illusion they depend on to feel secure. In your presence, they're forced stiff only for a second to confront the emptiness they've ignored. That kind of confrontation is painful. And so deep thinkers often become the targets of resistance, mockery, or quiet distancing. It's rarely personal. It's psychological. You become a living mirror, reflecting back everything they've tried to hide from themselves. Jung called this experience the encounter with the shadow. And most people, understandably, don't want to meet their shadow. It's messy, it's uncomfortable, it demands change. So instead of facing it, they push away the person who brought it into view. That person is often you. Have you ever tried to warn someone? To offer them a lifeline before they slip too far? To gently reveal a pattern you could see was destroying them from the inside out. And instead of appreciation, you were met with silence, defensiveness, or even anger.
Sometimes you were ignored, completely cut off without a word. It wasn't
because you were being negative. No, you were being honest. But honesty has a sharp edge. Honesty unsettles. Honesty is raw, and it doesn't cater to comfort. Real doesn't sell. Real doesn't entertain. Real makes people pause in thinking. Real thinking can hurt. Jung once said most people don't actually think, they simply rearrange their prejudices. They repeat what they've been told, defend what they've inherited, and act out scripts they never wrote. But deep thinkers, they break those scripts. They question. They dismantle. They sit with discomfort. They rebuild from the inside out. And they often do this alone, because the price of understanding is the loss of belonging. That's the quiet tragedy of awareness. The deeper your insight, the greater the distance from the crowd. It's not because there's something wrong with you, but because the world around you is still asleep, still performing, still afraid, and yet you continue to try. You dim your light to keep from blinding others. You soften your words to protect fragile egos. You shrink your presence to make room for their comfort. You try again and again to fit in, but it never works, does it? Because truth has a frequency. And once your soul tunes into that vibration, there's no going back, no pretending, no playing small. So what do you do? Where do you go? How do you? You survive in a world that is threatened by your very nature. That's what we explore next. If you've ever felt like you were too much for the world, you weren't wrong. You weren't broken. We're simply born into a system that was never designed to support depth. Carl Jung called it mass-mindedness, the idea that most people don't think independently. They don't search for truth on their own terms. They simply absorb what culture gives them without questioning if it's real, if it's right, or if it's even theirs to believe. Most people take what they're given and never stop to wonder, whose truth is this? Is it mine or just something I inherited? Unexamined. From the very first breath, you're handed a script. You're told what's good and what's bad, what success should look like and what failure means. You're taught how to behave, compete, obey, conform. You're expected to smile even when you're breaking inside. Be polite even when you're disrespected. And if you follow that script, society rewards you, calls you mature. It says you're successful. It applauds you for being well-adjusted. But what happens if you deviate? If you pause for a moment and ask, why are we doing this? If you say, this doesn't feel right, this isn't my truth, suddenly you're no longer admired. You're the issue. You're branded as too sensitive, too intense, too dramatic, too difficult. But as Carl Jung understood, you're not to anything. You're simply awakened. The world has always feared what is awake, because awareness disturbs comfort. It disrupts the collective illusion. Let's go deeper. Think back to your earliest experiences in the education system. Were you truly seen for your creativity, for your emotional depth, for your curiosity? Or were you praised for memorizing facts, for sitting still, for keeping quiet, even when something inside you was screaming for expression? For most deep thinkers, school is the first institution where they encounter the stifling pressure of conformity. You sit in straight lines, raise your hand for permission to speak, and absorb standardized lessons. Not lessons rooted in truth, but in obedience. Not in meaning, but in control. The world does not encourage you to think deeply. It encourages you to follow, to adapt, to consume. Because followers are manageable. Followers don't ask hard questions. Followers don't threaten the system. As Jung saw clearly, a society that discourages self-inquiry is not built on wisdom. It's built on fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of truth. Fear of what lies beneath the surface of the human soul. And that fear, subtle, pervasive, seeps into every part of modern life. Becomes how we date, where shallow attraction is rewarded over emotional depth. It becomes how we work, where status and output matter more than fulfillment or purpose. It becomes how we live, always rushing, always chasing, always scrolling, rarely stopping to ask, is this even what I want? Jung believed the soul was never meant to move at the pace of modern life. It needs quiet. It needs slowness. It needs reflection, stillness, shadow. But deep thinkers, they don't just long for that space. They build it. They carve out silence. They protect it. When they do, it often unsettles the people around them. Why? Because in a world addicted to noise, silence feels threatening. In a society trained to flee from reflection, stillness feels like confrontation. People have been conditioned to equate busyness with worth and introspection with weakness. So when a deep thinker enters the room, they bring with them a different kind of presence, a calm that isn't empty, but charged, a gaze that doesn't just glance, but penetrates. They don't just hear you, they understand you, and that level of presence. It makes people feel seen. But for those who've spent a lifetime hiding from themselves, to be truly seen is terrifying. So they retreat, they distance themselves. Not because the deep thinker has done anything wrong, but because seeing clearly is too much for someone who's still afraid to look inward. That's why so many deep thinkers are misunderstood, called strange, labeled loners. Not because they are, but because they operate on a frequency most others don't even recognize. Jung once said, loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. That line hurts, doesn't it? Because you know it's true. It lands like a quiet echo in your chest. How many times have you wanted to talk about something real, something that actually matters? Something raw and difficult. Something about meaning, about trauma, about life and death, about purpose. And instead, you're met with silence, with nervous glances, or shallow small talk that changes the subject. It happens more often than we like to admit. You've seen through someone's carefully constructed mask and stayed quiet, not because you didn't care, but because you sensed they weren't ready for truth. And how often have you had to dim your own light just to be heard, to be accepted, to avoid overwhelming others? You start shrinking your words, editing your truth, softening your presence, until what's left feels more like a performance than a connection. But that's not real connection. That's survival. And surviving in a world that doesn't value depth has a cost. Over time, you begin to question yourself. You start thinking, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I really am too sensitive. Maybe if I could just stop feeling so much, thinking so much, life would be easier. But don't. Please don't. Because the moment you abandon your depth is the moment you begin to abandon your soul. And Carl Jung would never want that for you. He believed the world's greatest hope lies in those rare individuals, brave enough to remain conscious in an unconscious society, brave enough to continue asking difficult questions even when the answers hurt, brave enough to stay awake even when the world is begging them to fall asleep. You are that hope. You're not lost. You're not broken. But let's not romanticize it. Being a deep thinker doesn't make life easier. It makes it harder, because you can't pretend. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't lie to yourself and believe it. You feel it, all the joy and sorrow, the contradiction and clarity, the chaos and the calm, all at once. You carry beauty in one hand and grief in the other. And in a culture that teaches you to scroll past your emotions, to suppress and ignore, to move on before you've even processed, it's feeling that becomes rebellion. So rebel, refuse to be numb, refuse to be shallow. You're a deep thinker. There's a good chance you've gone through life asking yourself, why do I always feel so tired? Not tired in your body, but mentally, spiritually, in your very essence. You walk into a room, and even before a single word is spoken, you sense the tension lingering in the air. You listen to someone share a story. You don't just hear their words. You hear the pain beneath them, the parts they're trying to hide. You notice the cracks in their voice, the heaviness in their silence. By the end of that conversation, they leave feeling better, lighter, more understood. But you're left drained, like something was taken from you. Like the energy in the room shifted into you. And you ask yourself, why does this always happen? Why do people come to me when they need healing, but disappear when I'm the one in need? Carl Jung had a name for this: projection and unconscious vampirism. Let's unpack that in psychological terms. Projection is when someone unconsciously assigns their own unresolved wounds, fears, or desires onto someone else. And deep thinkers, they become the perfect target for that. They're like open canvases, empathetic, grounded, and aware. They hold space for what others can't hold within themselves. People gravitate toward that presence, often without realizing why. But here's where it becomes dangerous. When you're constantly absorbing the emotional weight of others day after day, conversation after conversation, you begin to fade. Your own voice becomes muffled. Your inner clarity becomes clouded. You start losing sight of what you feel, what you want, what you need. Your own needs become blurry. You begin to forget what it feels like to be cared for without earning it, to rest without guilt, to speak without calculating how your words might be received. And the worst part, no one notices, no one stops to ask. Because you're the strong one, the calm one, the one who always seems to have it together, the one who listens more than they speak, who gives more than they take. But inside, you're exhausted. Not just tired, drained, stretched thin in ways you can't quite articulate. This is how the world drains deep thinkers, silently, subtly, systematically. Not with loud demands or open hostility, but with dependency wrapped in praise. You're seen as the anchor, the advisor, the healer. Relationships slowly become one-sided. Conversations evolve into therapy sessions. Friendships morph into emotional rescue missions, where you're constantly expected to hold space for others but rarely offered any yourself. And over time, you lose something vital yourself. The clarity you once had about your needs, your dreams, your limits begins to dissolve in the noise of everyone else's expectations. Carl Jung believed that the world doesn't just ignore deep thinkers, it uses them. People are naturally drawn to depth. They're curious about it, even in awe of it, but they're also uncomfortable with it. Because depth reveals, and most people aren't ready to be seen that clearly. So instead of honoring your insight, they extract it. They take your calm, they take your vision, they take your energy. But how often do they give anything back? And when you finally pull away, when you reach that quiet breaking point and set a boundary, when you say, "I need space," they don't understand. Suddenly, you're no longer the kind, wise listener. Now you're selfish, cold, distant, but they don't see the truth. Your silence isn't rejection. It's survival. You're not abandoning anyone. You're recharging. Because being awake in an unconscious world is not just lonely, draining, especially when that world is designed to keep you distracted. Let's talk about the media. The average person sees thousands of ads every day, not by accident, but by design. And each one whispers the same poisonous message. You're not enough. Buy this, fix that, become more. But if you're a deep thinker, you don't just see the message, you see through it. You recognize the manipulation hiding behind the glamour. You notice how beauty is sold as worth, how fear is disguised as safety, how your attention is no longer earned, it's hijacked. And yet, even knowing this, even understanding how it works, you're not immune. That's the trap. Because deep thinkers don't simply absorb information, they process it, they feel it, they internalize it, and that takes energy. So much energy. Even something as simple as scrolling social media isn't passive for someone like you. Every post, every curated photo, every empty quote and polished smile, none of it slips past your awareness. It all becomes fuel for thought. It all activates reflection. Why is everyone pretending to be happy? Why does no one talk about grief? About shame? About fear? Why is vulnerability edited out of our lives like it's something to be ashamed of? Jung believed that the collective unconscious shapes society more than logic ever could.
Wow.
And right now, that unconscious is terrified of depth. It runs from it. So the systems we live in, schools, media, corporations, they're not built to nurture depth. They're built to suppress it. They tell you don't slow down, don't ask why, don't feel too much, don't sit with your sadness. Just keep going. But deep thinkers can't just keep going, not blindly. Not on autopilot, not without meaning. They have to ask, what does any of this mean? So they pause, they reflect, they feel deeply, and the world punishes them for it. In school, they're labeled as distracted or worse, motivated. At work, they're told they're too philosophical, too abstract, too in their head. In relationships, they're accused of being too intense, too emotional. It's too much. But here's the truth. They're not too much. They're real. And in a society built on performancing shallow metrics and curated lives, being real is a radical act. But radical acts come with consequences. When you choose to live authentically, when you dare to be real in a world addicted to illusion, you lose things. You lose friends who once claimed to care. You lose promotions because you refuse to play the game, because you won't flatter egos or compete in hollow performances. You lose invitations to gatherings where pretending is the price of admission. Why? Because you refuse to smile when something inside you is breaking. You refuse to say, "I'm fine," when your soul is screaming otherwise. And that refusal, though powerful, is also isolating, because most people don't know what to do with someone who can't be bought, who won't pretend, who lives with eyes open when the world prefers blindfolds. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. You are awake. But awakening doesn't come wrapped in comfort. The price of awakening is often isolation, the silence after truth, the pause after bravery, the room that empties when you stop performing. Still, there is hope. A quiet hope that flickers in the unseen corners of the world, because there are others like you, scattered but not alone. They too are observing. They too are thinking. They too are waiting for anyone to say the thing that everyone else is too afraid to admit. And when two deep thinkers materially meet beneath the surface, the world shifts. Even if only a little, the illusion begins to crack. The truth gets a chance to breathe. The soul exhales, relieved to be recognized. Even for a moment, it feels less alone. So don't shut yourself off. Don't numb your insight just to be accepted. Don't dilute your essence to blend in. There comes a moment in every deep thinker's life where the question arises like a storm on the horizon. Is it worth it? Is it worth seeing what others refuse to see? Is it worth carrying thoughts too heavy for small talk? Is it worth feeling this much when so few understand? Carl Jung believed that this moment, this dark, honest pause, is not a breakdown. It's a beginning, turning point. It's the moment you decide whether to shrink back into comfort and conformity or expand into the fullness of your truth, even if that means walking alone. The world won't ask you to take that path. In fact, it will beg you not to. It will tempt you with comfort in exchange for silence. It will applaud your numbness, reward your performance, and praise your ability to blend in. But deep down, you'll know that kind of life isn't living, it's surviving, and surviving isn't enough for someone like you. Not when your mind was born to wander past the edges, not when your heart refuses to go numb, not when your soul cannot stand pretending. That is not a weakness. That is your calling. Jung said, "We each carry within us a task, a kind of psychological destiny. And the deeper the thinker, the more sacred the task." Not everyone is meant to go inward, to confront the shadow, to walk into the fire of the self and emerge changed. But you are, and it's not a comfortable path. There's no map to follow, no cheering crowd, no medals waiting at the finish line. Some days you'll feel completely lost. Other days you'll wonder if you're cursed for seeing so much, feeling so much. But listen closely. That emptiness you sometimes feel, it's not failure. It's a space for something greater. To emerge, because when you stop being what the world expects, you start becoming who you truly are. Not right there. It's when your real life begins. Here's what they don't tell you. Deep thinkers are not here to be understood by the many. They're not here to be popular. They're here to awaken the few. To hold up the mirror. To remind people of what they've forgotten. To speak what others are too afraid to say. And yes, that mission comes with solitude. But solitude is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is feeling unseen. Solitude, on the other hand, is the profound moment when you finally see yourself truly and completely. And when that moment arrives, when you really do see who you are beneath the surface, everything changes. You stop chasing the world's approval, no longer begging to be chosen or accepted by others. You cease bending and twisting your truth just to make it easier to swallow, because you come to understand that you were never too much. Instead, you were simply too real for a world that thrives on masks and pretending. Can you imagine what it feels like to stand fully in your authenticity without fear or compromise? Jung once believed that embracing this inner complexity transforms us into living medicine, not through loud, heroic acts, but in quiet, subtle ways. It's in the way we listen deeply, without judgment, in the way we hold space for others, without rushing, in the way we refuse to turn away from difficult truths. You don't have to become a guru, write a best-selling book, or save the world overnight. All you need to do is stay awake, honor the depths within yourself, and stop apologizing for who you are. This simple act, radical and profound, is revolutionary in itself. And when you do this, slowly, the right people will find you, the ones who crave genuine depth, who think in metaphors, who read symbols in their dreams, who ask why before they ask how much. These kindred spirits are out there, searching for someone just like you, someone who can make them feel less alone in their thoughts, less alien in their truth, less broken in their beauty. But here's the truth: they will only find you if you stop hiding. So let the world misunderstand you. Let them whisper that you're too serious, too emotional, too intense. Smile gently in response, then go even deeper. Because this world doesn't need the filtered you, the toned-down version, or the agreeable smile on demand you. It needs your rawness, your questions, your silence, your courage. Carl Jung believed that true societal evolution begins with individuals transforming themselves. But who changes society? Not the loudest voices, not the richest, nor the trendies. Influencers, but the most conscious, the ones brave enough to journey inward and return with light. That person is you. So stop waiting for permission to be real. Stop expecting the world to value you first. Instead, value yourself so deeply that others either rise to meet you or walk away. Either outcome is perfectly okay. Because deep thinking is never about being liked. It is about being true to yourself, to your soul, to your very reason. For being here, if these words have touched something inside you, if they have echoed an ache you've never quite been able to explain, then let's keep this space alive. Like this video so it reaches more people who feel the same way we do. Comment below with just one word that captures how you truly feel right now. I read every single one. Subscribe and stay close, because here you'll never have to apologize for your mind. Hey. And if this message brought you value, consider sending a super thanks to support more real, raw, and honest content. The world may resist deep thinkers now, but in time it will come to realize that we were the ones trying to save. It's silently, lovingly, relentlessly, even when no one noticed. Until